Okay, we're back, and it's COMP1002, week 6, lesson 6, part 3, web and internet fundamentals at Georgian. And I want to do a little bit of a poll right now. So here's the first one. I'm going to just put it up there for you guys to see. I'm going to make it live. Let's see if this doesn't kill my thing. I want you guys to go to pollev.com/learn, and you can text learn to 37607 and answer this question. Something that indicates which elements will be formatted, right? Which one of these? Selector, declaration, inheritance, or location. Which one do you think is correct? I've got selected. Basic terminology. By the way, hint, 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 right? These two questions will be on your exam next week, right? Huh? pollev.com/learn. Right, so if you want to get 2 free marks on your exam, you want to take note of these questions or look at the video later. All right, so far I've got 100% in selector. By the way, I can't tell if anybody, if there's more than one response right now because I can't tell how many responses there are at this stage. I only just see a live audience response. So it looks like most of you are saying it's selector. Has everyone had a chance to respond? Yes, it takes 2 seconds to do so. You're right, it is selector. It's the simple one. When we say selector, it means that thing we're targeting, right? That's what we're talking about here. So let me just go back here and we'll stop the poll. And we'll do one more question and we'll get back into it just to kind of switch gears a little bit. We'll get back into, that's pretty good. See, 17 responses. All right, let's get into this next one and see what this one looks like, right? We'll do this one too. And we'll do one of those and one of this. So the next one is blank is the preferred method of applying CSS to HTML pages. External style sheet, embedded style sheet, inline style, default browser style. Which one is the most effective way? And I'll wait a little longer until some of you make other selections, right? You guys shouldn't make other selections, right? The selection number 1 is the right answer. Right? Right? And the reason for this is the reason why I'm bringing this up. External style sheet is the preferred method, and I'll tell you why. And I'm glad that you guys are all on track for the most part, right? These are simple questions, but I can't tell you how many times I put these on an exam, right? This kind of stuff on a fundamentals CSS HTML5, and they've gotten it wrong, right? This has got to be the preferred style, external style sheet. If you guys chose embedded style sheet or inline style sheet or default browser style, someone just did that for a joke, I'm sure, right? You know, one of those kind of things. Come on, now you guys are killing me, right? At the end of the day, if you don't choose A, right, as your you know, the way you do stuff, right, it's negative, right? It's going to impact you later on, and the reason why is because everything you do. You know, as an example, that is embedded in your styles. I'm just going to go back here to this. By the way, just before I continue, anything you do that is embedded to your styles, I'll update GitHub while we're talking here. So you guys have what I have. I'm just going to add updated style sheet. Right. Okay, push origin master. Okay, so I've got my style sheet updated as an example, and let's get back to this. Anything you do here, if I do it locally inside my file, right, in this file, I have to do it for every one of them. But now I want to have multiple pages, right? So the great thing about external style sheets is the same styles applied to all pages. I'm going to show you that. So I'm going to kind of create a few more pages here, just as we did last time. I'm going to do that in my OS, right? So because it's a little easier, right? So I'm just going to go into my OS here, and inside my index.html, I'm going to copy. I'm going to paste a few more times. So I'm going to say paste, 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 right? And let's just do this one will be products, just like we've shown you before, and other videos and other lessons, right? We're going to do services, you know, and we'll do an about and a contact. Okay, so we got some pages here, right? They're all the same. These are copies of index, right? let's make them a little different so we see the differences now. We have a full website going on, right? With our silly styles. Okay, so here we are with index. It says our title is COMP1002 lesson 6. We're gonna make some changes. So I'm gonna go to my about page. This is my about page. On my about page, we're gonna say about us and my title. So let's make some changes. So right? About us in my navigation, I'm gonna change my active class from here. I'm going to change it into my about, so we can see that that's where it's going to be, right? And in my H1 tag, it's not going to say welcome, it's going to say about us, right? We'll leave this one here as more about us, right? So that's just what I'm changing there. No changes to anywhere else, right? And I'm going to do the same thing for my contact page. So we're going to say contact. Let's just change the contact page here. Contact us. We'll change our active class. You can see now where the active class comes into play, right? Because now I can kind of specify one area that's active over another, right? And we'll say instead of welcome, we'll say contact us, right? And social media information, right? We'll make this an H2 tag. Just making this really quick. Some quick little changes that'll make it so that we know one site is a little different than, one page is a little different than the other pages. That's all I'm doing, right? And for our products, these are the products we have. So our products, and we'll do the same thing for our list items. We'll change this from here to our products. We'll put it here. An active class there. We'll say our products, and we'll go into detail with more about our products. We'll make this an H2 tag as well, just because it's a second headline, right? And our services, which we haven't hit yet, we'll do the next one. So we'll say this is our services, and we'll move the active class from the list item on the top here to services really quickly, and we'll say our services. Again, this will be more about our services. Okay, so we've got our pages, right? So index, about, contact, products. Did I miss anything? I think I got them all. All right, so we've got our pages and everything else that are going on. Each individual, let me just X out of these ones because I don't care about them right now. All I care about is my index and my main, right? And let's run our site to make sure that what it looks like. But before we do that, just because we made lots of changes here on GitHub, I'm going to go git add dot git commit -m, and I'm going to add the message that says added more pages to sites. There we go. There's my pages. I'm going to say git push origin master. So I do that. You have all my pages now, so you don't have to do all that typing. You can just copy and paste the pages, right? And let's take a look and see what it looks like on, Chrome here. So I'm going to run it on Chrome. This is what it looks like. And when I do that, if I click on products, right, here's our products, more about our product. Notice all the my products gets changed. It gets highlighted, right? Take a look. My active class has moved now to products to make it look like that's the active page. Services, about us, contact us, social media information. Look what's happened here, right? So there's a couple of changes that we made, and it affects most of our stuff. Welcome, welcome. Let's fix that one up so it doesn't say welcome, welcome. That gives me crazy. So I'll say more landing page stuff. I'll make that an H2 tag, H2 element. Okay, that's what we'll use for that. And you know what? Where did I screw up? So kind of do that. Fresh. More landing page stuff. Products, services. Services needs to be fixed. Talk about why in a second. Services. In my services, I want to make this an H2 element. Changes. Convert this into an H2. Okay, good. And let's see where else we've got going on. So refresh, about us. It's got to change too. So let's go change our about page so that it's accurate as well. More about us. I'm just changing the H1 to an H2 just to make it more accurate, more reasonable. Nothing. More about us. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to do this and contact about products and see how the bar moves now, right? This blue bar, which is our active page, it moves down. It looks like it's moving, like I'm actually having some feedback from it. We're really not doing that. All we're doing is we're applying an active style to any of the list items we're clicking on. That's all we're doing. So when we have that as a, whatever the link is, as I move from page to page, I move to my products page. Well, my products page now is active, so therefore that's taking on the active style. Okay, that's what's happening there, right? So, but if you notice, this is where the great thing about CSS comes into play. That we're using an external style sheet. I got one style sheet that's affecting all my pages, and they all have a consistent look and feel to them. Even though if the consistent look and feel is ugly right now, it doesn't matter. They've all got the same look and feel. It looks like a site. It may not look like a beautiful site, but it looks like a site that has a consistent look and feel. I would rather have that from you guys than each page looking at, with each page having, you know, its own sets of styles, because that's twice as much work. Imagine if I do another style sheet for each one of these. Or I had to do embedded style sheets. I have to modify all my styles for each of my pages individually. That's nuts. That's a lot of work. This, one style sheet, multiple pages, that's why it's the preferred method. Okay. So we talked about selectors. Let's continue talking about this. So we talked about how to do, there's different kinds of selectors. We haven't talked about what different kinds of selectors there are. There's tons and tons of ways you can select things on your page. There's different attributes or you can affect and values you can apply, right? Remember the attribute background color or property or the color property, these two properties, there's many, many, many hundreds of properties for each type of object, each container, all right, that we can use, right? We're not going to go over them all today. We're going to go over some of the basics, right, so we can start targeting some elements of our page, right? How about comments? Comments are really important because when we use comments, and if I was going to go back to our page, here's my main CSS. This is kind of okay the way we have it written. We start off with our most general element, our body element, as an example. And let's say I want all of our heading tags, to have the same font family. Like for example, right now you notice they have different font families, but I want them to have different sizes. So for example, my headline 1 tag has 40 pixels, and I want a custom size for all my headlines, right? So my heading fonts are H1, H2, H3, H4, all the way to H6. I want them to have all the same font family. How do I do that? Anybody? Come on, guys. Take a look up here. I want all my H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6 to have the same font family. How do I do that? How would I write that rule? Yeah. That means they will all have the same font size too. Right? So I don't want that. I want them each to have different font sizes because the bigger the heading, or the more precedent the heading, H1 would have the bigger font size, and H2 would have a different font size, and so on. How would I do that? I could do this. Here, let me show you. So I could do one of these. I could say H1, H2, H3, which is normally what you see, H4, H5, H6, comment separated. We'll attack all the rules. So these are all the elements that I'm targeting, right? They all have a font family. I'm going to take it out of here now. They all have a font family of Consolidus or sans serif if Consolidus is not available, right? Let me just refresh this page to see what I'm talking about. Now, if you notice, they both have, as an example, the same font family. These are the same font family, but different sizes, right? Because I'm only specifying a size for my H1 element, not my H2, my H3, my H4, my 5 or 6, right? I haven't done that. In order for me to do that, if I want to specify sizes for all the other ones, I could go into detail here and specify all the other ones. I only have H1 and H2 on my page, but I could do something like this. I could say my H2 tag has a font size a font size of, let's say, 30 pixels, right, with a line height, right, of slightly bigger, 35 pixels, and a color of, let's say, I want to keep a color of, I don't know, some other color other than black. Let's make it blue, just to be really annoying, right? All right, and let's so we can get a live site going on again. I'm just going to go back to brackets and kick this one back alive again, right? So that we're back and we can see our live site going on. All right, so you can see that now we have our H2 tags have the same font family. All of them share the same font family, so they're affected by this rule, right? And then they have two more rules. Take a look here, right? That I'm targeting my H1 and then my H2 separately, and they have different rules applied to them inside their declaration blocks. So I can be very specific. So I can be general here that affects all H tags. All H1, H2, H3, and so on have the same font family, but they have different font sizes and line heights and colors. Okay, so I can be very specific that way. Okay, cool. So that's how you would do that. So let's go back to comments because that's what I was going to target. So I want to say these are all my kind of beginning tags or whatever. But I want to get into more specific tags. So I want to say here's my active class. So how would I add comments? I could do something like this. I could say active class styles. Okay? So anything that affects my active class. And then I can say this one is for my header and masthead styles. So what am I doing? I'm kind of organizing my CSS, and I can add some stuff in there like this, just separators, right? So that way, when you read it, you know what they mean, you know what they have. And I can also put my name and all that kind of stuff at the top, which is also important, because sometimes I want to have that. So I can put in, here's my comments, I'm going to put in there something like, name or author's name, and then maybe, a date, it's date, which is Friday, October 16th, 2015. Right? Yeah. So there's a couple of comments. You could add comments, and of course, just like they're ignored in regular code or they're ignored in the browser, HTML comments. These are the way you do comments for CSS. Let me update my GitHub. So my git commit -m updated main.css and git push origin master. Okay, let's get back to this. So that's how you do comments, and that's why you do comments, to kind of give an idea of what this section is all about. Here's some examples here of the stuff they do. They've added here, if you notice, article in the PowerPoint, article aside, caption, figure, all this kind of stuff has display block, and we'll talk about what display block means in a future session, right? And that would be after the break. So we're going to talk about CSS now. We're going to have our exam next week, and on very high level, kind of theoretical stuff. We'll get you to do stuff again, build something during your exam. Again, it won't take the full 3 hours. So when we're done, you can go, have a nice break, and then afterwards, when we come back, we'll get right back into CSS, and we'll get into more, more details about how to use CSS in a more productive way, right? Okay, so we talked about, that the body tag is like the main container tag for everything else. Think about the body as, the container tag that contains all other containers, right? And this is how it would look. Let's say, for example, I have a div tag that's inside of my body tag, right? Well, my div tag may have an H1 tag, an image tag, a couple of paragraphs, and each paragraph I could emphasize or make small depending on how much I want to. I can have different elements inside. This is how it works. This is almost like a hierarchy of how things go. Well, if I attach a style to my body, inheritance rules stipulate that all of the tags inside, all the containers that are contained within my body container also have this style applied because it's inherited, right? So if I apply it to the body, it goes everywhere, right? In order for me to override what I've done with the body tag, I have to be more specific and target those areas. If I want to be more specific for my H1 tag, like I'm already doing, because in my body tag, look what I've specified. My body tag has a default font family of sans serif and a font size of 20 pixels, right? But in my H1 tag, I specified a font size of 40, right? And a line height of 50. So I've overridden the general styles, the stuff that I would have inherited from my body tag. I've overwritten it with a specific rule that I've put in for my H1 tag, right? So it starts at the top and filters down. So anything I do that's generic for my entire body happens everywhere. And then what I do is I have to override those. I don't want to do too many things on my body, because the more I do things on my body, everything has that effect, and I have to override more. So I want to do the most common things there in my body tag. An example of this is one of the questions we asked. What if I wanted to put a background color to my entire page? How would I do that, right? Well, I would do that in my body tag, typically. So let's do that. So we'll say, here's my font family, my line height, and whatever. Then I'll say a background color, right? So my background color is my page. And let's make it something like a gray, right? I want to choose a gray, but that's too dark. Again, I got my auto, kind of preview going on. How about a light gray? How does that look? Light gray might be okay, right? I don't know if I like a light gray either, right? Here's a light slate gray, and there's a green yellow. I don't want green yellow, right? But let's say I want a gray, but I don't know what gray I want. How do I specify another gray, right? Because I think that I want to even go lighter than a lighter gray, right? How do I know what light gray is? Well, I'm going to go back to the color wheel, right? How do I do a gray on my color wheel? Any ideas? Well, I could go here and choose, custom. I'm going to go custom, right? So there's my color wheel. If I go into the middle here, if you notice, I can pretty much go closer, right, to kind of a grayish color. Remember that the challenge that I'm having when I use my color wheel here, if I go more green or yellow or red or whatever, as I go towards the edges, right, I get more true color. But one thing it doesn't give me is shades of gray, right? Why would it not give me shades of gray with using the color wheel? Any idea? Color, yes. There's no black, right? I don't have a brightness at all. If I had a brightness or a luminosity or something like that, I could probably specify more colors here. I could specify more. I'm making my own color palette here, but I could specify more of a gray kind of color, right? So I always go back to my tools that I use for creating my graphics. And remember, what I was using before last week was Fireworks. You can use Fireworks. You can use Photoshop. And a lot of times what we do is we mock up pages with those other tools, and we try and match the colors that we get, either through that or through a picture. An example of this, if I wanted to add I can create a color palette from an image. I can do that by clicking on this, uploading an image to this thing, some kind of image that I have on my page. I don't have an image right now, but I could. And then what that would do is I could use that image to choose my colors from, right? Or I could just launch my program. So let's go and launch Fireworks for a second. So here's Fireworks CS6. And I want to choose a light gray from that. So I want to choose a color. I'm going to make my own color palette here, by itself, right? So let's try and do this. So I'm going to say File, New, and let's make it 100 by 100 to make it quite a little bit larger. We'll make it a transparent background for now and press OK. Here it is. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see the color that I'm going to use. I'm going to surround this color with the The reason why my box is not showing is because I'm not fitting it. So I'm going to go modify canvas. I'll say fit canvas so you can see the color. So that's the kind of gray that I want. It's kind of like it almost looks like white for you guys, but it's actually a light gray, right? So what's the color that I can use here? Well, the great thing is if I go into my color palette, it tells me it's E. Nice and easy. 238, 238, 238. I can use both methods of choosing my color, right? And I'm using this inside my program, right? So 238, okay, or 240. So let's go back and do that. So I'll affect that change. So we'll say my background color that isn't just gray, right? I'll say RGB 238, 238, 238, right? And when I go back to my my lesson here, if you notice, right, I've got my gray color. So now that gray color is affecting my background, but it's not just affecting this background, but every background of all my pages, right? That's the power of using a CSS style sheet that's external as opposed to one that's embedded. Hopefully it's been pounded into your head enough today, right? So you know that. That's the way to do it. Okay. So again, if you notice, this is the hierarchy, if you will, for the pages. Think about this as the document object model in some ways, right? The document object model that we're looking at, the piece of it that we're looking at, is just the body container. The body tag is a container that contains all the other tags inside of it, right? So if I do something to the body, it cascades down into all the containers, or it's inherited by all the containers that are inside of it. Okay, container tags. And here are some of the properties that are inherited. I would recommend, this is a good reference card for you guys. It comes right from your book. So things like direction, font, font family, font size, text indent, visibility, white space, all this other stuff that's in there, border, collapse, all these things are the things that are inherited, you know, but not all elements, not all properties are inherited. There's these ones and there's a couple more. Okay, so what happens when your cascade collides? So you load some styles from an external file. That's the way you have it. You have some styles in the top of your document. Don't do that, right? You also have some inline styles. Don't do that either, right? But let's say suppose you do that. Which styles are the ones that take precedence? Anyone know? So I have my external style sheet. I have my embedded styles on the top of my document head. And I have styles that are inline on in my document. Which ones are the ones that are going to be the ones that are being affected first? The ones that take precedent over everything else. Anybody? It's not my external style sheet. I'll tell you right now. My external style sheet is the farthest away. The closest rule to what you're affecting is the one that's going to take precedence, which means the one that's inline, which sucks. That means that if I put an inline rule on my page, it overrides all my other rules. Okay, that's bad. Right? Now, some people might see that as good. If you want to fix something and you just can't fix it, some people will use the inline rule as a workaround. I don't know how to do this. I can't figure it out. I'm going to slap this rule in, and it's going to override everything else. Okay? This works. I'll say it like this, except when you use the rule that's tagged as important, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So the law of specificity states that the more specific the selector, the stronger the rule. Remember we did that? We said, here's my class, and then I want to put any elements. Remember how we read CSS? I read it like this: all elements that have an anchor tag that has contained within an element that has a class of active. That's how we read it. That's more specific than if I say all anchor tags. That's less specific. All anchor tags, the set of all anchor tags, going back to math, right? Sets. The sets of all anchor tags is a big set, right? If I go the sets of all anchor tags that are contained within a class of active, now the set becomes a lot smaller, right? It's more specific than the larger set. The more specific the rule, the more power it has. Okay. So that's what wins. That's how that's what happens when these rules collide, if you will. From an order of importance, when two rules have equal specificity, the rules that appear later take precedence. So I have two rules. They're both equally specific, right? So they don't have any extra specificity, if you will, right? The rule that goes later, after, that's the one that takes precedence over the rule that comes before. So it means I override it with my second rule. If I have two rules that are exactly the same, here's an example of this. Let's write two rules that are exactly the same. I have my body tag with this. Let's write another body tag, right? These rules are exactly the same. They're just as specific or non-specific, if you will. So here's both rules. I can put both rules in my sheet. They're the exact same rules. No changes. Okay, let's change this sans serif font, okay, in my body tag down here. Notice my second rule comes after. They're exactly the same, but let's change this to consolas too, right? Now everything's the consolas. Even though I've got it here as sans serif, I've overwritten it down here. And if I change the font size to 25, I can do that too, right? The later rule, if they're equally specific, right, the later rule takes precedence, okay? Which was the way we can overwrite rules that have already been written, okay? Let's go back. Okay, so we've talked about different values, right? So there's the property and the value. There's some values that are preset, almost like they're enums. Who knows what an enum is from programming? It's almost like a set of values that have a special name to them. Just like if I say color is light gray, that's a specified value that's built in. I don't have to tell the browser what light gray means. It's built into the browser. Most browsers understand what light gray is. So some of them have those built-in properties or built-in values that you can specify. A border, for example, has 3 properties that you should specify. How thick the border is, right? What kind of style does it have? Is it dotted? Is it dashed? Is it solid? Right? And what color does it have? Right? Those are the 3 things a border has. And we'll talk about borders and all that stuff later on. But those 3 values, that's what it's looking for. That's almost like, think about that as a constructor for the method border. If I was gonna go back to programming, if you guys are developers, right? We think about things like I'm passing stuff, parameters into my constructor for border. How do I construct the border style? I got to pass 3 parameters into it, right? Size, style, and color, right? Doesn't have to be in any order. I can put style, size, and color. I can put size, style, and color. So it's not asking for these things in any order, but I got to pass these 3 parameters. If I leave one parameter out, right, it ignores the other one. It keeps the default parameters for the other ones. Here's an example of that, right? So if I go back to border, right, I specified in one of my styles, my class, I've got a border 3 pixels solid black, right? So what if I just didn't say 3 pixels? So I take that away. What happens to it, right? So I'm going to save it. What happens to my border, right? Let me just refresh this. Okay, so I'll go back to my thing. So there's no solid, just a solid border. I haven't specified anything, right? Well, what happens? Nothing changed, right? And there's a reason for this. How about if I take away the solid? If I take solid, so my border is black, but we don't know if it's solid or not. Look what happens to the border. It's gone, right? And if I don't specify anything, if I say border none, which I could say, it takes away the border altogether. Let's add the border back in, but you can do it 2 ways. I can have this way of adding a border. The border property itself can have all 3 values separated by spaces, or I can write it like this. Border dash, as an example, color. Border dash color is equal to black. Border dash, right? And let's, if you know, if I look at the options here, right? Border dash width, right? If I say border pixels, right? And border dash styles, right? Is equal to solid. I can do the same thing in 3 lines, right? A lot of elements have this kind of thing, right? Where they have, or properties. There's some properties that have, it allows you to specify each individual property in different lines. And you might see, this might be more comfortable to you. And if this is more comfortable, do this for now, right? The shortcut to writing this is what we wrote earlier, right? Instead of writing this, I wrote everything in one line by specifying just border, right? Let me just try this again. So I go back to here, and if I write 3 pixels solid black, it's the same as writing the other way. So people are comfortable in different ways. Some people are comfortable writing it in 3 different lines. I'm okay with that, right? Sometimes we need to write it in 3 different lines too, right? Because what if I don't want all sides of my border? I only want the bottom part of my border here to be black, but I want the other parts, the top, the left, and the right border to have no border at all. How do I do that? Well, I can specify that by doing this. Border bottom, right? Just the border bottom is black, right? So there's my border bottom, but the top, right, and left are nothing. How about the top and the bottom? How do I do that? I can do the same thing. I can say border bottom, border top, right? I can do that too. I could also specify it like this, right? So if I don't do this, here's another way to write border. I'm just going to give you some examples here so you don't get too confused. 3 pixels, 0, 0, solid, black, right? If I do this, does the border know what to do? It doesn't know what to do. What I'm trying to say is I want my border top and bottom to be 3 and my right and left to be 0, right? With a solid black border. No, no, no. It doesn't know what to do there, right? But if I do this, so solid 3 pixels, 0, and then if I go border bottom, right, is equal to black, and border top is equal to, as an example, red, right? Still doesn't know what to do because this format, it doesn't know what I'm doing. What am I saying here? Border 3 pixels. Until I get everything right, like this. For example, 3 pixels, solid, and let's say I say 1. Let's say I make the top 1 pixel dashed, right? Or let's make it really big, 5 pixels dashed. There we go. Make it just different. You can be as specific as you want with your decorators. And this is why we don't use that horizontal rule. Remember we talked about the horizontal rule, the HR tag? And I said, probably would never use this again. The reason why is because I'd rather put it in a border, right, than use a horizontal rule. Horizontal rule is part of our old way of doing things with HTML. We want to try and avoid that as much as possible and use some kind of border that we attach through CSS. Okay, let's go back. So when I go back to this, what it's saying is you have your property and you have your values. Some of them are preset, 3 pixels, 1 pixel, solid, dashed, and then color you can specify hexadecimal, RGB, or a special, kind of a color that's already been pre-specified, like gray or red or blue or something like that if you want to. The other one is lengths and percentages. I use a font size in pixels, right? Font size of 40 pixels for my H1 tag, right? So here's my H1 tag, right? So if I go back to my H1 tag in my main, if you notice my H1 tag, I specify a font size of 40 pixels. Well, the other unit you can use other than pixels for font sizes, which works very nicely, is ems. What's an em? Anybody? I'm going to use ems. Actually, it's an old printer's. If you're someone who comes from print or advertising, you know what an em is, because a lot of the CSS stuff we're doing here, all these rules, the way we're doing them, it comes from print production. That's how we used to do it on print, and this is what we've inherited here from a web development perspective, right? So, ems are the size of an em, right? The size of an em, and the typical size of an em is 16 pixels. That's your typical your size, right? So if I specify a font size for my body of 20 pixels, the ems, all my ems, the general size of all my ems in my body are 20 pixels. And that means I can specify how much more than 20 pixels my font would be. So if 20 pixels is my em size, and I want to make it double the size for my H1, I could specify, hear me out here, 2 ems, right? Who does not understand that? Probably none of you understand that right now. That's okay. Who does? Put your hands up. Who does not understand what I just did? All right. So think about the size of an actual M. I'm drawing. The letter M, 20 pixels. If I want to specify that my H1 tag is bigger, when I type an M in my H1 tag, it's bigger. If I want to specify twice the size, I can multiply my regular M size, which would be 20, by 2. So I can specify 2 M's, twice the size of a regular M in my body tag. That's why it's M, so we know what it is. If I put just M, you may not know. They understand what it means. Remember, if I was to give this to someone who knows print, if I said 2 M's, they would know what it means, right? Okay, if I as an example, if I make this 4 M's, right, now it becomes 4 times the size of my 20 pixels, which means equivalently this would be 4 times 20, 80 pixels. That's how big this is. And if I go even higher, I can specify, the great thing about M's is I can specify points. So I don't have to go the whole 4 M's. I can do something like this. I can say I want it to be 1.5 M's. I can make it 3.7 M's, right? So it gives you a little bit more control in terms of how many pixels they are. And there's a great pixel to M converter for those people who don't know. I'm just going to go back to 2 M's for a second. So there's actually some really cool online tools for this. So I'm going to go to my web tools, and I'm going to go into CSS. I think that might be where fonts and colors. Let me see where that is. It's called Pixels to M's. I always like looking at that stuff, but I don't know where it is. Let's see. I'll say Pixels to M. Pixels to M's. If I go Pixels to M's, there's actually a Pix to M website. And if you notice, the default size is 16 pixels because the default background size for my fonts from a browser style perspective is 16 pixels, right? So my M then, 1 M is 16 pixels, right? We'll talk about why M's in a second. Okay, here's something else. If I make my pixels 20, if my standard M is 20 pixels, and if I want to convert, right, so 20 pixels, I want to convert M's to pixels or pixels to M's. So let's say I have 2 M's. How many pixels would 2 M's be in this pattern? If my standard size for all my base pixel size for my body font, right? 40, right? So if I click convert, it's 40 pixels, right? So the reason why would I use M's instead of pixels? Pixels make sense to most of us. M's, it's funny, right? People don't know. Well, because what if, right? I'm on mobile and I switch sizes, right? So I'm on a mobile device. I use M's instead of pixels. Pixels are specific. They're absolute, right? M's are relative to the size of my base font. So if I change my base body font, everything else is based from that, my pixel size for all of my other styles that are inherited change too. That's why. So if I'm going from desktop to mobile, whether it's tablet or smartphone, I can specify the same M's, same style in terms of size, but I can change my body style. It'll affect everything else. That's why we use M's. And the same thing goes with other ways of measuring. So again, so I can use M's, and if you notice, it gives you an example of they're relative to the size of the baseline value for the M. Okay. Here's another one I can use: width 80%. Width of 80%. So I can specify a width value for a container. Let's do that for my header. Right. So if you notice my header, I'm going to go back to my, let's get rid of this, and go back to here. You know, notice that we have this big area here. I don't want to make this so big. I want to make it smaller. In fact, I want to make it maybe at the maximum 25% of the width of my screen. How do I do that? Well, if I want to make my header 25%, I go into here, and I specify how big I want my header to be. But I already have something called masthead, and I already have something called header first section, right? I can certainly target my header class. Anything that has a header class on it, watch. Header class, I want to have a width of 25%. Okay, well that you would think that would be what it does. Take a look. Now I've actually shrunk down the container size to 25% because I specified a width value of 25%. I could also specify, instead of percent, I can be very specific and say 300 pixels, right? 300 pixels. Why is 300 pixels worse than percent? Anybody? If I specify 300 pixels, it's absolute, right? But if I say percent, it'll be the same percentage size on a tablet or mobile phone. I don't know how many pixels it's going to be, but it's going to be 25%. The same ratio of size is going to fit on my page, right? Sometimes it's better to do that than give a fixed number. Because if I give a fixed number, it's fixed. So if it's 600 pixels, it's 600 pixels for every screen. Yeah.
What configuration are we using an absolute, like 300 pixels in that kind of situation?
we might want to specify pixels in terms of height sometimes. And sometimes, depending if you're not making a mobile, well, nowadays we don't do it anymore, but from a responsive, if you're not using responsive design, that's a great reason for using it. Sometimes also you may want to specify a minimum width for something. So you might say minimum width of 100 pixels, regardless of the size, because you want it to adhere to, it may be too small, because sometimes 25%, it's too small, right? For even, because it's 25% of your screen. If your screen is small, it's going to be really small. So maybe you say, well, minimum size is 100 pixels, right? That's why you might want to do that. So again, I can specify 300 pixels. I can also specify ems. And if I say, for example, I want it to be 300 pixels, and if my base pixel is or my base M is 20 pixels, so 10 ems would be 200, right? 15 ems would be 300. So I can say 15 ems, and you see it's the same size. So 15 ems, 300 pixels, and it's not quite 25% because depending on how big my screen is, if I go 25%, these are all different units of measure you can use to specify the size of or length of an object, right? Or a container. Okay, let's go back. So that's what this does in percentage. Okay. The other one is line height, a number, a fixed number, like 1.5. I don't have to use pixels. I can specify line for example, our line height or z-index. And z-index would be how, if you're layering one thing on top of the other, then how high on the layering order, the stacking order it is, which we'll get into another day. But for there, sometimes you can use simple numbers instead of having any units at all, and it understands what we want. Okay. The other thing is if we use URL, sometimes what I want to do is I want to use a URL, right? Some kind of another URL to include a background image. So let's say my background, right now we're making a color, but I want to use a background image for my background. Like an example, that image we pulled down, that I like a really nice image for my background. I want to put that whole image that takes up my entire background, something massive, right? I could specify an image instead of a color, right? By attaching an image here in my CSS. So now it's not part of my HTML, it's part of my CSS. Can I right-click and download that? And the answer is no, right? Let me show you that. So I'm going to find a big image on my background. Let's find a big sky image. So I'm going to go just kind of do something like this, sky. And if I look at sky and go to images, right? So I want the sky to be my background, right? And if I want to specify, well, there's one that's really massive, right? 4,754 pixels by 3389, some massive picture, right? I could choose that. Let's choose this one. I'm going to say save image as, and we're going to put this, we'll call it sky. It's a sky JPEG. And we're going to put this inside of our document, right? Which is our COMP1002 lesson 6 assets. And we're going to make a new images folder. Images. And we're going to save it here, sky. So it's saved. We got a sky asset. Now I want to attach it to my background. So instead of a background color, like I specified, I want to have a URL. Right? So I can say background color is equal to a URL. And I'm going to kind of specify where it is. So I want to kind of go up to my, I'm in my content. So I want to go up one. I want to hit my my assets. And I want to look at images, and I want to look at my sky JPEG and press enter. Okay. Let's refresh. Hey, how come it didn't appear? Right? So I'm trying to put this in as the background to my image, right? How come my URL didn't appear? Let's just make sure. Look how, see how the sky is showing here, right? Let's go back here and put this in here. Do I have to do this? Is what you're going to ask. Here's my background color, right? I can't do a background image. If I go background by itself, it'll work, right? But if I go background color doesn't know anything. It doesn't know what a background color of my URLs. But look what it's doing here, right? My background is repeating over and over again into my entire background. I don't want that. How do I change that? Well, there's a no repeat, right? So if I say something like background is this, right? And if I say no dash repeat, can I do that, right? Well, I could. What about if I want to make my background full screen? How do I do that, right? So no repeat, and let's say stretch. Or fill. I think it might be fill. And if you don't know what it is, by the way, like I can't remember the actual rule. So I go background, another background, and if I start typing fill or repeat or no repeat, if I want to know all the, how about this? How about if I want to get some information about my background property for my body tag? What do? Well, you can always go to W3 Schools, which I recommend. I'll look at W3 Schools, and if I go background, right? So if I search for background, come on, Tom. Oh, I can't do any searches on this thing for whatever reason. I'll tell you in a second. But let's just say if I was gonna, and it's not allowing me to do it. I love it. Let's go back to tutorials on CSS, and I want to do background. Wow, it's not letting me do it. I got some messed up browser stuff going on. CSS backgrounds. So there's different ones: background image, background colors. There's just background, right? Like I said, right? So if I go just background, here's background image with the URL. But even background image, as an example, has additional properties to them. Like, for example, here's background repeat X. What was the other one that I was looking for? No repeat. Background position, right top, and I want to make it so it stretches. There we go. Background image. And here's some stuff that allows you to do. The URL non-initial inherit, as well as other things. That's why it doesn't allow you to do that. If I go background position, right? If you notice, there's some other values here: left, top, center, and so on. Right? Initial inherit. I can tell you where it's going to be. If I just go background by itself, right? Here's the different values that it has: background color, background size, right? Here's my background size, so I can specify a size for my background, right? Which is a %, a cover, which is scale the background image to as large as possible. That's what I want. So background size is cover. Let's try that. We'll go back here. So I've got my background, no repeat, right? And background size is cover. All right, I'm covering it, and now if I go back, now there's my image. Right? If I use background image, that also works. Let me show you that. So if I go background, instead of background, I go background image, right? Does it come up? You said background image, right? So here's my background image. Here's my URL. Let me get rid of the no repeat for a second so you can see the difference. So I'll just get rid of the no repeat rule. And there's my background image, right? And if I want to background dash repeats, and I'll say no repeats. And if I go back here, if you notice now it's a background image that's a sky with no repeat. Okay. So again, URL, it tells us what we're getting in. If I want to try and right-click and save, so I say right-click, save as. I'm going to save the picture, right? I'm going to save the whole HTML element, not the actual background itself. Okay, I'm getting some really weird artifacts right now because of what I'm doing. But don't you worry about a tang, Batman. See, look at this weird artifact I'm getting. Bizarre. Anyways, so that's what this URL does. Okay, and that's the pattern. So whatever the background color is, you don't have to specify quotes if you don't want to. Here's the color palette, the simple 16 predefined colors. There's more than 16 predefined colors now. There used to only be 16, but with CSS3, there's many more than 16. Okay, so these are the ones that we used to have. We have, like we said, we have light gray, we have aqua, we have all kinds of other colors that the browser understands, right? And we talked about the difference between RGB and hexadecimal color values. So RGB would be this way, that we would do it this way with from 0 to 255. And then there's hexadecimal, which gives you red, green, and blue in different couplets, right? That's what it does. Now the other one that's kind of more popular, that's becoming more popular these days, is something called HSL. right? So whereas hue, saturation, and luminosity, right, or lightness. So if you notice, you can specify the hue 282, the saturation level 100%, so brightness, or sorry, lightness would be 25%. And I kind of put this little reference card in here from the book that shows you how to think in HSL, and you have to think around the wheel. So if you start at 0, right, 0 is red because that's the top of the wheel, and if I kind of go to a 60-degree angle, right, 60-degree angle is probably right here, and you can notice that's more yellow. If I go to 120 degrees, over here, that's more green. So that can specify the color for my for the first value, which is the hue. And then you can specify whether the saturation is 100% or less than 100% green, as an example, or as an example, how bright it is, whereas 50% would be the lightness. If you go higher than 50%, it's too bright. It actually washes out and becomes completely white, right? 50% is the right value. So some people like to use HSL. I have to tell you, though, that HSL color is not supported across all browsers, especially IE. It will not support HSL color, HSL or HSLA, right? But it does support RGB and RGBA, all right, for the most part. So that's it from a color perspective. And for the most part, it tells you at the bottom here that it's not support certain kind of colors, and color gradients aren't supported in IE. We've kind of covered the second PowerPoint altogether. It's only 16 slides or something like that. One thing we didn't cover is this idea of important. And I want to kind of talk about important for a second and what that means in our style, right? Remember that if you don't remember all these things, we're going to go over them again and again. So you'll kind of get an idea of what they mean, all right? So we've talked about the idea of adding in a external style sheet. It needs to have a .css extension on it. Okay, that's one thing we've noticed, right? And also, if you notice that the link element, right, is the one that links everything to the style sheet, which we've already kind of shown you how to do from in previous lessons, right? We don't want to use embedded style sheets, so I'm not going to show you how to do those. Although your lab that I've given to you up on Blackboard does ask you to do a little lab on how to do a style sheet. Please don't accept the basic styles that come with your lab. Replace the styles as it's asking you. So if you notice on the style sheet that comes with your lab, do your own style sheet that overrides, you know, the one that's built into the files that come with the lab. Remember, the lab is due tonight, you know, at midnight. Worst case scenario, I would accept it by Monday. All right, so it's not that urgent that you get it done. I'd like all of you to have it. I know I see some labs. Some of you have not completed your labs for whatever reason. They're each worth 2%, guys. So this is our 5th lab. That means that's 10% of your final grade if you haven't done any of them, right? Which is pretty crazy, since they're pretty easy, right? Inline style is the same way. I'm not going to talk too much about that, like I said. One thing to notice is that there is this idea of an important, you know, I can tag an element as important, like the style. I'm saying here, I want to put a margin top of 1M and make that important. And I'll tell you this, important trumps all other styles. So if I add important to my style, it'll override everything else. But this is bad, okay? It's not good practice to put important throughout your styles unless you absolutely have to, as a workaround, okay? So we don't want to use important unless we absolutely have to, but it trumps all cascades, okay? It trumps all specificity. Even if it's not specific, you put important, it'll work every time, right? So that's one thing to note. And also, we're going to talk about media-specific style sheets later on. It mentions it here in this chapter, in chapter 8, but we use media-specific style sheets to target different media, print, screen, and also media sizes, and we can use this @media decorator, right, in our to specify that this set of rules, as an example, is for screen sizes that are only 480 pixels, right? So that's really specific. That's how we can do responsive design. We start getting into responsive design by specifying the width of our screen. So if our screen size is 480 pixels, then use this set of styles. If our screen size is greater than 480 but less than 700 and whatever, 800, let's say 800 pixels, use this style, and so on. If it's greater than 1200 pixels, then use this style. And you can use what they're called is CSS3 media queries, right? We can use CSS3 media queries to target different size screens. So we can apply different styles to them according to the size of the screen. Everything else we've covered, right, for this particular lesson. And again, this is probably one of the most important lessons combined that you can have, because it's the beginning of your CSS. I'm hoping that you're going to take some of these things I've told you to heart. Please don't use embedded styles or inline styles ever in your web development career. It would be bad form, right? And think about using M's when you want to be responsive, and percentages over pixels, because pixels are more absolute, okay? And there are places to use pixels, because sometimes we have to specify that, but we want to use more flexible units as opposed to absolute units from a layout perspective. All right. That's it for me. Please remember, next week, come early, come all, exam. First thing in the morning on Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning. We're going to have an exam that covers, first we'll do our, true, false, multiple choice, that kind of stuff. That's part of it. And the other part is you're going to have to build something in class. Okay? Any questions before we depart for the day? Got 2 minutes. Yes? I'll come to you in a second. Anyone else? Yes? You can't get the image. I'll come to you in a second. Anyone else? All right, guys, see you next week. Good luck. Please do your lab. It'll help you with your exam.